Tema Okun is part of the Dismantling Racism Initiative program of educators that, and they publish a number of really interesting programs or statements or essays about ways that we can really take on the issues, the underlying issues of embedded racism that a lot of us are not even aware of when we are sort of immersed in white normal culture. It's really hard to see ourselves. So I'm curious if anybody had, I mean, there were 15 points in that that article, and I don't expect we're going to manage to get through them all, but I liked the way they were grouped in terms of kind of the issue and then an antidote to the issue, a way to dismantle the attitude or the actions that were presented as part of the white supremacist culture. And I personally found that I had actually done every single one of those things more than once, and sometimes all within the space of about an hour. So I think it's really refreshing to take a look at these issues like perfectionism or the sense of urgency, or I'm the only one who can do this, and kind of sit with them and say, wow, really? How interesting that you're the only person who can manage to resolve this issue or stand up for that. I think learning to be more collegial, more team-oriented, to listen to more voices, really bring more voices to the table is great, but listening to them is another step. So I'm curious if anyone has an observation or a comment or a particular one of these points they would like to kind of chat about a little.
Like, as you said, I was so sort of shocked how well I fit the profile of doing all the bad things. And my observation also is, this is regarding inclusion of racial inclusion, but just in interpersonal relationships, I think these same issues apply. And it was disheartening for me. I felt called out. It was very personal. I felt like they got me. Also, I was a teacher, and I thought about, oh gosh, I hope I wasn't just like that. I think most of the time I wasn't like that in my class, but I'm sure there were times I was like that in my class too. Especially thinking you're the only one. You can do it the best. Your way is the best. If you can get them around to your way, it will be the best. And yeah, some of those things.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think one of the pieces when we first are looking at material like this, one of the things we do is take it to heart and take it very personally. And that can be salutary in the sense
Mini sandbox did not fare.
It's good for us, but it's not very comfortable. But I do feel like part of these conversations is the whole idea, and I know we said this before, getting comfortable with discomfort is a big piece of the work to me.
Yes.
And so some of us, have to kind of get past the social norms and be able to say, whoa, I made a mistake. I'm sorry. Help me do this better.
Right. That's very true. Acknowledging and trying to go from there. I agree.
Karen, you're nodding your head.
Oh yeah. I'm just, I read through this and it's just, the perfectionism thing really struck out to me as like, and making mistakes is that a lot of times we view people or ourselves that make mistakes, but we think we are the mistake. And it's not, are not the mistake. It's a mistake. We all make them.
Right. That's right.
And, a lot of times, if a person makes a mistake in their life, they're judged forever. And that kind of culture has to go away. Unfortunately, lately when I see the news, when a person, especially a person of color that is attacked by the police, it seems like the police are circling wagons trying to find a reason why they had to do that. That this person made a mistake in their life. There was some kind of failing. And it's like we all fail at some time, even the police, even the cop. And that was what really struck me about the whole thing, is that, you know, looking at us as not perfect people individually and at ourselves, and say that it is a mistake. We are not a mistake.
One thing that I learned in AA was one of the steps is to make amends. And having made many mistakes while I was drinking, I had a lot of people to make amends to. There was one person that I attempted to make amends to, and she wouldn't accept it. And it blew me away. It made me very upset. It made my life quite miserable for quite a while. I happened to bring it up in a meeting, and it was said to me, "Why are you making amends? For whom are you making amends?" And all of a sudden it dawned on me, for me, not for her. It was for me. And it made sense to me, and it makes sense to me even now that it's me, you know, and I do make mistakes, but at the same time, I can do what I can as far as saying, I'm sorry, I made a mistake, and I shouldn't have said that, but at the same time, we come back and it's me. I have to learn from it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think a lot of us grew up in cultures or family cultures or social cultures where it was not safe to admit that we were wrong. And it was not safe to push against the culture. And so that feeling of making amends might be dangerous can kind of get in our way sometimes.
Yep. There's a joy in it, though. There is an absolute joy in it. At the end of it, if you buy into the idea that it's for me as well.
I like to speak to the part about objectivity. I can't see myself on the screen, so I'm hoping that if you can't see me, first of all, I'm African American, I'm female, and I'm elderly. So what I like to say about objectivity is that I think that all of us come to everything with an identity. And sometimes our identity is not so much what we see, what we see when we look in the mirror, but what others see when they look at us. And sometimes there are lots of people that others see behind us that go into how they respond to us that we have forgotten about. We are part of the history of this country and how we have been treated in this country. I think there's, I like to speak of it as the myth of objectivity. It's a myth. We all write and speak and act from our own experiences and who we are. And who we are should not be, it should not be a default. Like in this country, in this community, I have found that being white middle class is the default. Whereas if you're not that, then you're different. Whereas every person should be seen as different from every other person. And you're not objective when you speak. You're speaking from your own experience, whether you're female, male, whatever race or ethnicity you are, what your experiences are. All of that goes into making up who you are and how you respond to situations, and also how others respond to you. And I always like to introduce myself as an African-American female. And I sometimes jokingly say, for those of you who are colorblind, this is what I am. Because I'm not, there is no such thing as being colorblind. We all see color. You may be colorblind in the primary colors or something, but when it comes to people, we see color and we respond. And if we can be honest about how we're responding or why we're responding or what our experience and our identity says about why we respond, we can more quickly get beyond just being reactionary. because that's what it is. It's being reactionary. So what I like to leave this talk with is the myth of objectivity. It's a myth. There's no objectivity. Every time you read something in the newspaper or you listen to something on the radio or something the president says or somebody, that person is speaking as white male or female. I grew up, you know, how did they grow up? What community did that person grow up in? All of that. So when we start to talk, I think it's if we're trying to reach a level of honesty and intimacy with others where we break down barriers, we will identify ourselves. That's all I have to say about that.
Thank you, Barbara. And I could see you. Because you
Thank you.
can't see yourself, but I see you. Yeah, one of the things the antidote says about objectivity is to realize that everyone has a worldview, that everyone's worldview affects the way they understand things, and realize this means you too. Push yourself to sit with discomfort when people are expressing themselves in ways which are not familiar to you, and assume that everyone has a valid point, and your job is to understand what that point is. And I was reading that and thinking about how hard that can be in a very polarized time like this, when some of the things people say publicly are just seem to be designed purely to be inflammatory or distressing or hurtful. And yet part of me says, well, then what's their message? Are they saying I'm wounded? Are they saying I'm frightened? I'm baffled? I'm scared to pieces? I mean, trying to hear the fear behind the anger helps me try to be, if not as compassionate, I always like to be maybe less reactionary myself. Because that is, you know, it's really easy to just kind of go, God, what a pig, what a scumbucket, or whatever. But really, we're human beings, and people, I don't think we come out of the womb angry. Maybe people do, I don't know. But I think a lot of what happens to us along the way changes our ability to really empathize. And I read a really interesting study this week that said practicing empathy, which people are starting to do because therapists make us do it if we have marital or problems or anger management problems at work, we're all being taught to practice empathy, and it changes political positions, which was an unexpected side effect of the project. And what it really was about was not politics as much as mindset, that practicing compassion, practicing empathy, no matter where we stand on any situation, I think that really can help us open our mind, and your heart kind of goes with it.
Hi, I wanted to say something about that.
Please.
Wait, can you hear me?
Yes.
I was looking at the document, and what you said kind of led me right in that direction. I always, try to figure out where all of the animosity comes from. I'm always trying to figure out, because for me, racial tensions are kind of like the Hatfields and the McCoys. And I use that all the time because that's the way I feel about it. It's like people are angry, but they don't remember why. They just know that this has been going on for hundreds of years. And if I'm white, I'm supposed to not like Black people. And if I'm Black, I'm not supposed to like white people. And then generally, because people are people, somebody will do something to you and you blame the whole culture of people. It's like, but it doesn't work both ways. You know what I mean? It's like when a Black person does something to me, I don't say all those Black people, they're all no good. A white person does it, I say, well, those white people, they may have some issues, so it kind of, talks about the compassion. I'm trying to understand what's behind all of the anger, and what I come up with is that there's fear. Fear is, I heard someone say, I don't know how true this is, that we're born with fear. Babies fear falling, and, that's why they cry. They fear not being fed. And so if that's the case, I think we have to get past fear. And a lot of that fear is systemic and it's built in. Looking at the document, and it talks about the need to comfort. People in power seem to feel like they have a right to be comforted when they're uncomfortable. And that speaks right to the fragility, that has been written about. No one, I wasn't brought up that way, that, I had to be comfortable all the time. As a matter of fact, I was uncomfortable most of my life. But I can see that people who are afraid feel the need to have someone reassure them that, no, you don't have to be afraid when you see me walking down the street. But in the same sense, it's not my job. And it's never going to be my job to make you feel comfortable about how you feel about me. I'm not going to play that role. I think it's up to every person to take a look at themselves and see where their fear is coming from and try to understand, because it's, don't put it all on me that you're afraid of Black people. And so now I got to tell you how to deal with them. It's, I can't do that. Because it's too hard on me and the way I internalize things. I feel bad that you're not comfortable, but I don't think it's my job to comfort you. And people in power shouldn't feel like it's the marginalized people that have to make them feel comfortable in order for them to, do their job or whatever. So that's what I got to say about that.
Thank you.
And this is Kristen Tollefson.
Hey, Kristen.
Hi. So for those of you, I see lots of familiar faces, and for those of you who haven't met me, I am currently the Director of Education and Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Advancement at the Art Museum. And I just came off a call with our evolving task force on the board that is also doing parallel work to this conversation. And I have used this group as an example of I'm so heartened to see such a wide variety of people included in this conversation, from students to folks I recognize from the Senior Center and in between. So I just want to call out the piece of that I don't think is referred to as, it's called either or thinking, which I often refer to as binary thinking. Mm-hmm. And that I think has been alluded to, this kind of right and wrong model that many of us absorb somehow, whether it's through generations or through the cultural structures, whether it's through school or peers, or, I mean, there's a lot of this that I think that we're really forced to reckon with right now, especially during this cultural shift. And that what, if you want to call it a spectrum or a gray area or what, I mean, there's so many different terms for this, but I think this really highlights the idea of being uncomfortable and without footing or without security, or the idea that you have security in knowing something for sure. And I think that as a very small piece of this whole document could open up the conversation in so many different ways, where you're using the lens of race. But I know that for my child who is gender non-binary, having this conversation about where they fit in the world as a person is really important. It's interesting to see the this kind of whatever, the noting of this either or thinking. I love the idea of the both and. I use that a lot in my own artwork and in conversation, where you can actually have two apparently oppositional ideas existing at the same time. One of my favorite examples of that was actually two students looking at a piece of artwork in the museum. One of them saw a crucifix and the other one saw a train track leading up into outer space, and both were right because they could actually ground what they were talking about in the visual. So I'm not really saying anything that you don't all know. I just am giving a big thumbs up to digging into this conversation, which in my previous meeting, we were talking about how to start on this diversity, equity, inclusion conversation. And one of the things is establishing a group or a container where difficult conversations can be held, and helping people recognize what is required of them to enter into the difficult conversation. And I think that listening and setting aside your defensive responses and all of those things are really so valuable for any kind of grappling that we're doing. So I just want to give thumbs up to this group, really.
Thanks, Kristen. I think for really all of us, one of the huge pieces is, do you feel safe? Do you feel that you will be respected and protected? Are you able to speak freely and not get repercussions? And boy, creating some more spaces like that is excellent. I love that you're doing that at the museum. I know they're doing that at Blodell too. A lot of places are starting to look around and say, we've only used one lens and it was the white male lens. Let's try some other ones. I also have a transgender kid. Well, yeah, and that has been a real expanding experience for me too. Talk about getting past the binary. And for all of us, learning that there's so many spectrums, right, is really another push, but it's a great push. Pushed past the so-called white normal.
This is Tressa Johnson, and part of my attempt to be a better colleague at my job, I have been following the Neuro Leadership Institute, which is a group of researchers, neurological researchers, who are taking recent research into the neurobiology, our human neurobiology, and then placing it into a business context. And how can we take research into our workplaces to create better and more effective workplaces? And the neurobiological research on which they are basing their work is this idea that we are a tribal species, and as we have evolved, as our brains have evolved, we have a deep need to be part of a group, right? So, and part of that is a very survival. It's about surviving. We don't want to be separated from a group. We can't survive independently. So certainly this was true, many years ago, and when we were our very survival would depend on connecting with other people. But as our brains have evolved, our frontal lobe is aware that while our survival is not dependent, on other people. We, insofar as, I can go to the store and but our reptilian brain, when we feel threatened, or I was thinking about this, Brenda, when you were speaking, when we feel fear, the reason that we get so defensive is because our reptilian brain kind of takes over and tells us that on some basic level, our survival is at risk. Right. So when we talk about defensiveness and fear and and how we kind of get over that, I can't help but think that part of that is just remembering that, the way I think about it is just remembering that we have a frontal lobe. Like my survival is not, I have made a mistake, or I'm afraid, and just remembering that, like, okay, I feel this fear, but that's okay. That's my reptilian brain telling me that I need to stop, that I need to protect myself, but that's not the reality of the situation. And for me, I think of that as, while it's that's where my personal relationship is. I think I agree with everything that has been said about the importance of, letting ourselves be, kind of go beyond where we're feeling fear, or beyond where we might feel defensiveness. And my personal responsibility then is to remember that feeling of fear is not about survival, and that growth is possible. But it's helpful to have that information when I look at other people too. This morning, Katie Tour was talking to supporters of, with a very firm political stance, and she was asking them how they came to that stance and why they have an identity. And they were saying, well, people on the other side, they egg my house. They see me in the store and they flip my hat off, and they want to they want to fight me and argue with me, and person after person after person that Katie Tour was asking this question about, why are you so, how did you become so connected with this political belief? And they were talking about being attacked. And I thought, oh yeah, that reptilian brain, man. It just gets you more ingrained and kind of firm in your stance, and how important it is to remember we have a frontal lobe. Sorry, I just talked for quite some time, but no.
Thank you, Tressa. No, that's great information. Emily, is Emily still here? You had something to say about normal.
I've just been, I just shared a quote that a colleague shared with me earlier this week that we're using to design some of our work around equity in the school district next week. And I just thought, what I really liked about it was this notion. I mean, I think a lot of us are trying to find the good that we can in the crazy year that we're having. And what I like about this quote is it not only says we're not going to go back to what we had before, right? Like, as we move out of this pandemic soon, I hope, as the skies clear, we don't want to just go back to the way things were. And so we have to create something new. But I also think it's really interesting that this poet chooses not to say we're creating a new normal, right? She's saying instead we're stitching a new garment, because anytime you normalize things, then you're automatically excluding things. And so I like the shifting away from that language altogether. And I like the forward thinking kind of opportunity for inclusion there.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Is it in the comments? Did you put that quote?
Yeah, I put the quote in the chat, and I mean, it's a funny backstory. Apparently, Sonya Renee Taylor is a poet she wrote this quote, and then Brene Brown, who's, this famous white media person, she publicized it. It got associated with her name, and she had to say, wait, no, these are not my words. I can't take credit for this. And so it's nice to see that the poet, the author, is getting the official credit. But this, I think, is one of the most powerful articulations I've heard of this notion.
Thank you.
I happened to see this in the chat, what Emily was just talking about. And I was thinking, because we don't always, what's normal? Part of, as we age, things that were normal for us change. And as young people, things that were, quote, normal to them 5 years ago is going to change. So we are always in a state of we are always in a state of change, I think.
I'm Sophie Eldridge from the high school, by the way. I think this connects like a lot of the ideas that we've been talking about. But in the document, it was mentioning like in the sense of urgency, like section, how we tend to yield like short-term solutions and like try to get something out there, like one and done. Boom, a celebrity just said, "Oh, I'm anti-racist now," and then boom, racism solved. But I think that like if we actually focus on long-term solutions and the process, like the author was saying, that will be obviously a lot more sustainable. And I think there aren't, like, it's less easy to give yourself like a manual or a guidebook for how to like keep the process going than it is to say like post on Instagram. So I just thought that really stuck out to me.
Yeah, and the antidote, of course, is I think there's a lot in that statement about what antidotes are, but being clear about how you'll make good decisions in an atmosphere of urgency. I liked that part. Realize that rushing decisions takes more time in the long run, because inevitably people who didn't get a chance to voice their thoughts and feelings will at best resent and at worst undermine the decision because they were not heard. I love that part. Did you see that? Did you look through the antidotes too? I think the whole idea of bringing people to the table is starting to be more widely accepted, but I still think the listening part gets forgotten sometimes. Just because we're all sitting together at the table doesn't mean everyone's being heard. Bonnie, you're nodding. Do you want to say something about that?
Well, yes, I just kept looking at so many of the antidotes said, slow down, listen, just as the previous speaker was saying, you can't just, okay, now I'm this and everything's fine. It's a time involved, and it's changing your mindset and just really being a good, like a good person, but a good person who listens and knows change is necessary, knows that things are not what they're supposed to be. So obviously we have to change. And how do we begin that change? But it is listening and being aware and not being so everything about yourself, basically. There's a lot of other points of view.
I do think that one of the things that I've been encountering with our stepping into this conversation at the museum and in my independent life is that a lot of the things that we're learning have a term attached to them. And it was funny, I sent this document to the DEI work group for the board as we were meeting. I sent it to them in the chat, and they responded immediately to the title of the document, and made mention of the fact that this is like advanced learning for people who are just becoming. This idea of white supremacy is still very, it doesn't make sense to people. They shut down when they hear it. And so many things, like when we say doing the work, or when we refer to terminology like white supremacy or white fragility, a lot of times those things still need to be unpacked. And I would say that the equivalent is with listening. Like when we say we need to slow down and listen, every one of us has a different approach to what that might mean. And slowing down or listening might look different for me than it does for someone else, but it is still really critical. And how do we kind of come to a shared agreement about what listening might be, or co-support people in hearing what their expectations are for being listened to?
Actually, Barbara Golden, are you still with us? Because you could probably respond to that really well.
one thing that has helped me a lot, I've been reading the book Caste by Isabelle Wilkerson. And she talks about a lot of these, she puts a lot of these definitions in terms of a caste system. And I really, listening to her talk about it, because I've been listening as an audio, listening to her talk about it, it makes a lot of sense, because it really does mean that in order to maintain this system, we have to have everybody play their role, which means that those on the bottom of the system of, you know, we have a hierarchy in this country. And in order to maintain the top part, the people at the top, or the groups at the top, need those who are lower in the hierarchy to play their role. And I think what's happening now, which is why there's what is normal, is that people are saying, I don't want to play that role anymore. You know, I don't want to be your teacher. I don't want to be the person who you're afraid of when you walk down the street. I just don't want to play that role. And, you know, some young people are saying, I don't want to be defined by gender. I don't want to be defined by what caste you put me in. And so I think that's what a lot of us are experiencing, that what is normal now. And some people feel off kilter. They want things to get back to normal, meaning they want to know who's on top and who is on bottom. And when we talk about immigrants to this country, a friend of mine, a white male in Wisconsin, said to me, one of the first things immigrants learn when they get here is who's on top, meaning what groups get to be defined as white. And what it means to be white in this country means to have privileges that are reserved for those who are considered white. And he was noticing that people, he was talking about immigrants, because he was involved in some organizations where they dealt with a lot of people coming in from other countries, not necessarily to stay, but they picked up on that right away. So we teach people, we teach ourselves, those of us who have lived here for a long time, and those who are coming in, who gets to be white and who is not. And if you get to be white, you get to have all the privileges of being white. And if you're not, then you don't have these privileges. And it goes from there. And Isabelle Wilkerson defines it as the caste system. So when we talk about normal, normal means everybody in his or her place, all groups knowing what their place is. And I think the reason why some people feel so out of sorts now is because lots of people are saying, I don't like that place. I don't think that's fair, and I'm not going to play that role anymore. As Brenda was saying, she just, you know, some people of color, some Black people are saying, it's not my job to make you feel comfortable. You know, and some other people are saying, I don't care if you're afraid of me. When I was a teacher in high school, I had my class watch the movie Crash. I love that movie, Crash. If you haven't seen it, you should see it. There's that great scene in it where these two African-American guys are walking on the street in a predominantly white area of California. I think it was Santa Monica. And they're talking about how all these white people are afraid of them. And then they rob them. And I thought, that's really great. You know, sometimes you need to be cautious on the street, not because of the race of the person, but because of something else. So it's learning to treat, sometimes it's just learning to treat people as individuals. I was in a parking garage one night and had a white woman look at me and start running. And I'm thinking, all I could do was laugh. I'm thinking, you're bigger than I am, and you're a bigger threat to me than I am to you. And she was just looking at the color of my skin. She wasn't looking at, this is another woman and she doesn't look threatening. I was just standing and talking to somebody and then walking to my car. And so she judged me. I figured one criteria, instead of being discerning is a good word. We're discerning. Some people are a threat, some people are not. And that's why I love Crash, because they were all individuals. They were not stereotyped as this is the good guy, this is the bad guy. These people are just prejudiced. That's why they're looking at us. No, because you're criminals. You were criminals and you acted like criminals. I thought that was really funny.
Sophie, do you want to say something about Crash?
Sure. Yeah. All I was going to say is I think it's available on Netflix. So go watch it. It's really good.
I wanted to say something. What did I want to say? I got so wrapped up in that. Oh, that another, they talk about the worship of the written word, right? And just to tie into what Barbara was saying, there's another book called Racecraft, and it's by Barbara Fields and Karen Fields. I think she and her sister. And I'm reading that, and it's a lot of information about how, pretty much not the caste system, but how race has been created and identified through the years, and the different documents that you can find information in. And the whole idea is for it to be, it was crafted like witchcraft. It's like racecraft. You have to buy into certain constructs that there is this thing called race, and it's not the human race. It's a Black race and a white race, and there's other races, and you have to buy into that before you can believe that other races are inferior, right? And the whole idea of race is what actually created racism, right? Because you can't have different races. You can't hate different races if you don't have this construct of race, right? And then it really ties into the document when it talks about worship of the written word. Just because stuff is on paper, people believe it to be true, and that's been happening, for my 62 years, people write out things, or what's even worse, we see it on social media, and it's believed to be true. There is no fact checking or anything like that. And those kinds of things is what has changed or have tried to change history. Things have happened and people write it in a different version. And so that becomes the truth, and we have to get away from saying that just because it's written down, then it must be true, because we tend to believe the narrative that we want to believe in whatever situation that is. There was a lot of Black history that I didn't know about that I'm learning about now. And there's some things that I've seen that, I can't unsee, which is really disturbing. I sat through a presentation. A woman was telling us about where the slaves used to come into this village and where they kept them at in these, for better lack of word, they look like cages. And they wanted to open this island up as a cultural, historical spot. And they tried to dig out these caves so that they could make them open so people could go in there. And what they thought was cement that they was digging was actually human waste, because they had the slaves laid out and all lined up, and all of the waste went downhill, and it just built up so much. And they showed this, and I can't unsee that now. I cannot unsee that. And they showed this huge cement ball in the middle of the courtyard where they would chain the women to. And it's just, and when I think about that being part of my history, and I have to try to say to myself, Brenda, just don't stay there. Don't stay there, because then if I stay there, then I become one of the Hatfields. You know what I'm saying? Now I'm angry because of something that happened 4 years ago. But, you know, I want other people to see it, to be angry too, so we can start from somewhere, not from, oh, why y'all mad? You know, that's what a lot of people say. Why y'all still mad after all that? Well, there's some things I can't unsee. You know, I love the whole idea about having a safe place for me to say that, you know, and not for people to feel like I'm attacking or judging, or just let me be able to say it. You know, let me be able to say how it made me feel, so that I can work through what I'm working through while you're working through what you're working through. You know, we need those spots so we can do that, or else we will just be going around in our own little circles. So, yeah.
There's honor in sitting with each other's grief. There's honor in sitting with each other's not just discomfort, but pain. And I think the hidden history has really worked against us as a country and as a human race. And that's what we're trying to do now, is open it up. And looking together is very uncomfortable. It's horrible. It's painful. It's sick. It's just sick making. And yet, if we can't look, we can't change. I used to say that to my kids all the time. No consequences, no change, honey, right? I'm sure they really appreciated it. But I really believe that. If we don't have consequences, we don't change. And part of the consequence of trying to learn to be bigger people, to be more fully human, is discomfort and sitting with honoring each other's state of being.
Things have to get moved along. And I think sometimes we can do small parts. We see this big vision, and that's great. That's 10 years down. But what can we do in the next 6 months, or what can we do? And I think sometimes setting goals is important, making sure people are heard. But I think that we also have to move the process along in some way, because otherwise we're sitting here and it's 10 years and nothing gets done. And that doesn't do anybody any good. So I just found that in my business life, that there's sometimes some goals have to be set so that things can move along. So I think that that's an important thing to think about, that the goals need to be set. We do need to hear everybody, but we can start taking incremental steps to get some things done.
Totally agree with you. Well, we're kind of out of time, but I'm feeling like there's so much rich material here that I'd like us to return to this next time. I don't have a date yet from Reed, but as soon as I do, I will send a link to everybody along with all the books that people have talked about. And feel free to email me with anything you want to add in terms of resources and stuff to pass along and share. And I thank you all very much for showing up.